let's start then with Britain's worst miscarriage of justice. This is Peter Sullivan, now 68. So he's spent 38 years in jail. So he was 30 when he was imprisoned. The judge quashed his conviction for the murder of this young florist. She was only 21, Diane Sindel, back in 1986. Peter Sullivan was dubbed the Beast of Birkenhead. He's a Merseyside man. He'd long protested his innocence, and of course he was given a life sentence with a minimum of, I think it was about 15 years originally, but unless he had admitted his guilt, then he wasn't going to be allowed out. But now we know he wasn't guilty, because the DNA that was collected at the scene, because of more up-to-date methods, has been tested. It was never his DNA, it wasn't him. And as Martin said on the programme this morning, this is two injustices here, because it's the injustice to him, and now Diane Sindel's family are sitting there going, well, who on earth killed Diane?
Whoever killed him may still be alive and still be free.
And police say that they've double-checked the DNA against, I don't know, almost 300 DNA samples. They don't know. They've reopened the investigation. But it just goes to show, doesn't it, miscarriages of justice can lead to years in prison, and one individual holding out and saying, it was not me. And he could have been freed if he'd said, all right, it's me, you know, I don't believe I did it, but, you know, I didn't do it. But he wasn't released on those grounds. Yeah, and he says, I'm not bitter, I'm not angry. Well, he's entitled to be bitter and angry. Oh, I would. It'd be off the scale in terms of anger. But how did it happen at the time? They've got to go back. How did it happen? Did the police exploit him, fit him up? Well, he said they did.
Well, there's reports of an early confession, wasn't there? An early confession before there was a lawyer present.
That's right.
So you've got to go back to that, and then there is the case, try and find the killer, although it's going to be something of a cold case 38 years on, whether the killer or murderer, because it was a brutal murder and a sexual assault. It's going to be very difficult, but this can't be the end of it.
No, and that family who thought they had closure, they went through a court case, they you know, were able, in a way, you're able to put it aside and hopefully move on with their life. All those raw wounds will have been reopened this week by realising there was no justice. Yeah,
brings it all back. People as well should stop and think. There's people who argue for the death penalty. If the death penalty was been on the statute book, Peter Sullivan might well have been executed. Which would be unforgivable. Another terrible miscarriage of justice. That's the problem.
Absolutely, it gives you the chills, doesn't it? It's such an awful case. That news came out yesterday, of course. He's now released with that remarkable statement. But this morning we have news of other prison sentences, and this is that prisoners will be released from jail as little as a third of the way through their sentences if they behave well. Now, let's assume that all these prisoners, of course, did what they did and have been given the prison sentence that they deserve. But a third of the way through their sentence does not feel like a justice system. It's been reduced, hasn't it, over the years? It used to be 2/3, went down to a half, 40%, and now they just have to serve a third of their sentence. Kevin, is this just because the prisons are full to bursting?
I think in part, yes, but it's not automatically going to happen, this, because there is a review commission from David Gauke, who was a Conservative Justice Secretary. Keir Starmer's Labour government commissioned him to review the justice system, sentencing and prisons. Yes, prisons are very full, unquestionably. But you want a system that somehow works, and I agree. I think only a third, feels rather too low.
Soft justice.
It was 1981 an act under a Conservative government. No, sorry, 1991 would have been John Major, wouldn't it? After Margaret Thatcher introduced almost automatic parole after half your sentence. And you have to complete, under these proposals, you'd have to complete a course, you'd have to have good behaviour, show you're turning your life around. And I think you need incentives inside, because I think we do need to try and rehabilitate people so they come out better than they go in. But I do agree, a third seems low.
Is there a presentational issue here? Because people are... let's say someone's been sentenced to 12 years and they come out in 4. People feel very angry about it. Is the more honest thing to do to say, you're sentenced to 4 years, but if you behave badly, that can be increased to 12 years. So that the public and the public face of justice and what people understand, we know what the rules are and we'd be more honest about what the reality of the situation is. You've got a minimum 4-year term. It can be extended to a maximum 12, rather than saying it's 12 years, but we'll let you out after 4.
You get a range. You're going to serve 4 to 12, you would say, in this case, or 6 to 12, or whatever it is. These seem to be non-violent offenders, although if it's your home that's been burgled, you'll be furious because it's such an intrusion. I think we need much more clarity in sentencing. For instance, a life sentence is never, or very rarely, a life sentence. It'll have a
well, a
period
life
attached
sentence
to it.
is a life sentence. It's just not a life sentence in prison.
Yes.
When life sentences are given, you are released from prison after a minimum term, and then you are, you know, still under that life sentence and could be recalled at any time.
I think very few people are. You can get there are exceptional cases to get a whole life tariff.
Yes.
So your entire period will be in, but they're very, very rare. I think if a life sentence is 20 years, say it's 20.
The 3 reasons we put people in prison, it said, are punishment, rehabilitation and deterrence.
Yeah.
And for deterrence to work properly, you need transparency and transparency of justice, which is why, you know, calling what it is, probably a better way to go.
Yeah, people will just think, here we go again. This is all about, it seems like the system is on the side of the offender, not the victim. This will be really, this will really stick in the craw.
But they've got James Timpson's shoe company that is a penal reformer. And what they want to do is people to come out and reduce reoffending, because if you reduce reoffending, there'll be less crime, there'll be fewer victims. And I think you have to turn the prison system around, and you've got to punish, you've got to have the deterrence, but you want the rehabilitation too, and it's been lost in some ways. And I think the idea is if you have good behaviour in prison, you tackle your drug problem, your alcohol problem, you take courses, literacy, mental health, whatever it is, and you'll have to show some remorse, then you can be allowed out.
Andrew, the problem with saying soft justice, there are only 1,000 spare places left in prison. We don't have the prisons to do it, do we?
No. Well, there was a failure of the last government to build new prisons, and this lot say they are going to build prisons, but it takes a long time.
Well, the thing is, it depends what you think prison is for. If you think that prison is for punishment, it doesn't feel like a punishment to serve a third of your sentence. If you think that prison is about rehabilitating prisoners so they never offend again, and therefore it is about the safety of the community, then making them work hard to rehabilitate themselves in prison and then giving them the benefit of a third of their sentence is actually a positive thing, which does increase the safety of communities.
But prison is also about getting antisocial creatures off the streets.
Yeah, so it's about the safety of the community.
It is.
So that they're not there.
But
if they are...
Scaring other people so they don't commit crimes.
Yes,
That's
deterrence.
the deterrence. That's so important.
Yeah.
It has to feel like it seems to be a punishment to stop people wanting to go...
The real deterrent is being caught. That's the real deterrent.
Unless you're a regular burglar and you think, well, I'll do all the right things in prison and I'll only serve a third.
Yeah, and then prison isn't working other than it protects the rest of the community while that person is in prison and might commit crimes in prison against other prisoners and prison officers as well who kind of need protection. But the system doesn't work when, what is the reoffending rate, 50% within 12 months or something, and short sentences aren't working. Look, if it's my house burgled or I'm mugged, I'm attacked, I'd want a 40-year, sentence for them. That's how you will feel.
Of course.
But we need a system that works, and it does change people when they're inside.
Yeah. From the details that we have so far, sex offenders, terrorists and domestic abusers on determinate sentence may be excluded from this release after a third system, which will at least come as some
certainly hope sex
comfort.
offenders wouldn't be released early.
Terrorists, domestic, if you've been the victim of domestic abuse, you wouldn't want the perpetrator to be allowed out.
Because, some of the people who were allowed out early when Labour first got in reoffended on the same day.
Yes.
Yeah, well, they did what the Conservatives did. They were the criminal justice system was going to grind to a halt, and courts wouldn't be able to sentence people to people because they weren't the places.
And people turned up in... You remember the guy turned up in his Daimler?
And drinking champagne.
Yeah,
and of course, they made a presentational error of allowing everyone out on the same day. Rather than
so you then got these pictures of people celebrating.
Yeah, because people are released from prison every day. But you're not normally in a big splurge. But there's also I think this report will also look at alternatives to prison, which is controversial in itself, but there is some support for tough community action.
Just to change the subject for a second, one of the things that we're doing on the show today is we're talking about council tax and the debt collection procedures of council tax, which are, well, frankly, the worst form of debt collection, far worse than any commercial companies. Now, we know councils are struggling with funding at the moment. It's my personal belief, if you improve the way that you collect debts rather than making it punitive, you actually help people with their finances, you'll collect more money in. Am I picking at an open sore here by talking about council tax debt collection when councils are in so much trouble financially?
I think off the top of my head, there are 6 councils in England alone that are bankrupt and a lot more teetering on the edge. And they will argue, I would say, we have to get this money in immediately because of the cash flow problem. Birmingham, for instance, our biggest local authority in whole of Europe, broke completely.
I wonder if, because I think a lot of people may not be aware of what Martin is raising to everyone's attention today, which is the sort of unique way that councils have of pursuing council tax debt. So, Martin, I just wonder if you could outline it for those who've never experienced it, because for anyone who has experienced it, and I know someone who has, it escalates very quickly and it's very intimidating.
It is the rapid nature of the escalation that is beyond any other form of powers that you have out there. And we're already getting swamped with people who it's happened to, because it happened to millions of people. You miss a monthly payment, within 3 weeks they can ask for the year's payment, which begs the question, how could someone who can't afford a month's payment pay for a year's payment? 2 weeks after that, they can get an order in court, which then adds to what you owe, and they normally charge up to 150 quid, even though the proportional cost of them is nothing, so it's totally disproportionate. And then a week after that, so now 6 weeks from first missed payment, they can have bailiffs in. A commercial lender would, even if it were going at its most rapid under the treating customer fairly rules or the consumer duty that we now have, it would be 6 months to a year, and they would have had to first put you through debt counselling and look at how to treat you sympathetically. Council constituents are treated far worse than any customers of any lender. And it catastrophises people's finances, it throws them into terrible debt. It means that actually it's going to add cost to local councils because they're going to have to look after these people once all the debt collection has gone in. And not every council does the most rapid level, but of 71 who publish their debt collection details, 85% do the most rapid level, and they are allowed to by a legacy government rule, which I would like to see changed. Nothing else. And when you talk to debt councillors across the country, what's the worst form of debt council tax? What's the priority debt council tax? Because it escalates so quickly and bailiffs are in so rapidly.
Yeah, presumably in part it's that way because a council can't withdraw the service. You stop paying, they're not going to say, I'm not going to empty your bins or kick your kids out of school, or there's going to be no social care, you can't use a library. But look, if you can miss a payment and all of a sudden you've got to produce a year's cash, I mean, that just seems unfair. You would want the payments rescheduled in some way, and you understand councils are hard-pressed and they have to get the cash coming in. It's a very unpopular tax. It's like 200 quid a month or whatever it is coming out, so it's a big chunk. But you want people to be treated in a way, you'll get them to pay and you won't make them worse off.
The reason we're doing it today is Mental Health Awareness Week.
Yeah.
Right.
And you won't be surprised to hear that you are 2.5 times more likely to be in council tax arrears if you've got mental health problems. Over 70% of the people council tax bailiffs are coming to have mental health problems, and this is catastrophic for people's mental health. My big issue is I worked for years on the breathing space scheme, which said when people are in crisis debt, they get sick, they're allowed to, there's a hold that can be put on by debt counsellors that stops debt collection, stops you being chased and allows you to put your system in order for 6 weeks. It's the opposite with councils. You've got 6 weeks to the point of bailiffs, and people don't have the money. And if they don't have the money, you escalate the system rather than ever signposting to help, which is what we've now campaigned that consumer debt has to do and commercial debt has to do. Councils don't have to. It hurts their constituents. It hurts councils because they don't bring in more money. And it is absolutely devastating. We're going to be hearing from a couple of individuals later who've had this happen with mental health problems.
As you say already, we're hearing from viewers. Jackie says, I paid my council tax on time for years and years. But I was assaulted outside work, left with terrible injuries leading to multiple surgeries, which is when I fell behind on council tax. Even though I told them what had happened to me, the bills with extra charges kept coming, bailiffs on my doorstep, more costs for them calling. I had nothing to give them, and as a result, spent years in debt and bad credit
I cannot tell you how many people I've heard who council tax was the tipping point that put them in debt and catastrophised their finances. This is why I'm making such a big deal of it, because it's not talked about in the chattering classes, but it is absolutely an underlying major cause of debt across the country. It's the rapidity, and I'll be asking the government to slow down the rapid nature, but I'll also be interested to hear when we talk to Pat McFadden, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, a Cabinet Minister later, what he would say to newly elected Labour councillors when their councils are collecting debt this way, of what they should be doing. How should they be collecting debts? Should they be escalating at such a level?
And do they know how the bailiffs are behaving as well? And the charges that come with bailiffs?
Always
pushing them away and saying, we don't really know.
But there's a Labour MP who was a council leader who...
It was Jim McMahon.
That's right.
And that's because he was the Oldham council leader, and he heard they had big problems with bailiffs behaving badly, collecting parking fines. So he deliberately got a parking fine. He said it took him longer than he should have, so they weren't collecting the fees properly. Didn't pay it, escalated through, and then the bailiffs came to his house. And the bailiffs charged him and charged everyone that day the full cost of a van. £150 seems to ring a bell because I spoke to him about it. And instead of just, they hired a van for a day, but they charged everyone the full value. He kicked out the bailiffs because he saw how they were behaving. But he had but you're right.
Council tax liability orders by councils are charged at typically 150 quid and cost about 10 quid. So it's a profit-making scheme on top.
Out of it.
There are some councils who've actually now got rid of bailiffs and have their own bailiffs, have set up their own bailiff team, some of the good ones, and who then go in and the first thing they do is go and talk to somebody about how they can try and help them through the system. And they're not losing money by it. They're not making money from it, but they're not losing money by it.
The council wants and needs the money, so you're going to get it. But if somebody can't... If somebody can't pay... making them even less able to pay by ratcheting up the cost is not going to help.
Town hall should not be profiteering on people who've got financial problems.
The other thing I think should happen is it should be, if you are in this situation, because you talk about, I know that your institute, the Money and Mental Health Policy Institute, has done research on this. When you're told it's been referred to bailiffs, and sometimes the first thing people hear in this situation is from the bailiffs. We've been instructed that there is a council tax debt, so then you have to investigate, well, hang on a moment, how did I get into council tax debt? But contacting the council and contacting the bailiffs take a lot of time and a lot of determination, and there should be a far easier way of contacting once you're in this situation, because even if your mental health is not already fragile, it sends you into a panic when you hear the word bailiff, because, of course, you think there's going to be a bailiff knocking at the door, taking stuff away.
Take away your furniture.
Well, so one of the things I think is really useful, Martin, about this morning is that I think whenever people get this, might get this demand, they think they're alone. And what's brilliant about you raising attention this morning is that people realise they're not alone. This is a widespread problem.
Millions.
And so what is it that people should be doing? I know that you want changes, but if you've got advice for those people watching this morning who think, I'm in that situation, I'm glad I'm not alone, what do I do?
Well, much as it sticks through the craw to say this, your council tax debt is the priority debt. That is the letter you do not ignore. It is the letter, when you get that, you need to act and act urgently. And if you can't afford to pay it, go to one of the non-profit money agencies, whether it's Money Helpers or Step Change or Citizens Advice on National Debt, before you get to the bailiff stage. So a letter from the council tax demanding debt it should have a big warning sign all over it. Bailiffs come to your door, don't let them in. Make sure all your stuff is locked up. Speak to one of the debt counselling agencies about what help you need. I mean, there are certain on council tax, certain down the line, if they get an extra order where they can force their way in, but not in a first instance, and go and talk to the local council. But I'll be honest, I'm doing this with my buttocks clenched, because it is not an easy solution, and it isn't going to work for everyone. The rules are wrong. The rules are unjust, the way it works, and there isn't enough protection for people out there, and it's damaging for constituents, damaging for councils, and the cost to the NHS and the cost for local councils because of the support that they're going to have to put these people through once it's catastrophised.
More on that.